So I was interested whether you were applauding for the opera part or the punk rock part. I see, it's an ecumenical group. All right, good. So I'm gonna, before Kabir and I speak, I'm just gonna give you the kind of 5 to 10 minute high altitude view of the book, because he's read it and I wrote it, so we both remember some things about it, but I wanna give you a bit of an introduction. This is a book about freedom, which is a word we use a lot in our American English. And the premise of the book is that we've got it entirely wrong. And the way, yeah, puzzlement already in the 6th row, that's good. Yes, and I mean you personally, as well as every other American. But to see how you have a big idea which means a lot to you wrong, sometimes it helps to go elsewhere and look back inside. So let me just tell you a story about where I was a month ago. A month ago, I was in the Kharkiv region of Ukraine, the far northeast of Ukraine, close to and then very close to the front. The city of Kharkiv itself is a big city, Cleveland scale, a little bigger than that actually, which was partly occupied by the Russians. I was in the apartment complex where the Russians were turned back, looked at the destroyed buildings, looked at the destroyed playground, now empty, of course. And I was reminded a few weeks ago there in Kharkiv how the Ukrainians talk about places like that. They call them deoccupied, deoccupied, deoccupied. And of course, the word that you want me to say is liberated, and I'm going to hold off on that, and there's a reason why I'm holding off. A year before that, I was in a little village in the far south of Ukraine called Posad Pokrovske, and I was talking to a lady who was called Maria, who was at the time 85 years old. Posad Pokrovsky was completely destroyed in this war, every single building, literally every building. This is not some kind of like Life magazine metaphor. It was literally every building was physically destroyed in ruins. She was in a metal corrugated shack about 10 yards behind the ruins of her house, the rubble of her house. And we were talking. And again, we were speaking in Ukrainian, and she used the word deoccupied. And I was thinking then, okay, well, what would it mean for her to be free? So if you push the Russians out of Kharkiv, or if you push the Russians out of Kherson region, which is where Posad Pokrovsky is, sure, then the torture stops, and the executions stop, and the deportations of children stop, and that's all very good, and it has to happen, and is necessary for freedom. But it isn't the thing itself. It isn't the thing itself. So Maria, who's 85 years old, it's good that she has the shack. She would be less free without the shack, right? But I don't think she'll be free until the rubble is cleared between her little shack and the road so she can get to it with her walker. I don't think she's free until the buses are running again so she can go buy food, right? Those things are part of freedom. The dramatic part, the important part, the military part is just a part. It's just a part. In a year earlier than that, I was visiting a school, or what had once been a school, in north central Ukraine in a town called Yahidne, where the entire population, about as numerous as you folks, in fact, almost exactly as numerous as you folks, the entire population was forced into the school basement during the entirety of the Russian occupation. So every man, woman, and child, aged, young, and infant. About 10 people were executed. About 10 died of natural causes during the weeks they were held in that school basement. And then the Ukrainian army deoccupied Yahidne. The survivors came out of the basement. But were they free? They don't have a school anymore. The children can't go to that place anymore. And when I left Yahidne and gave the key back to the gentleman who was kind enough to give it to my friends and me when we visited, the thing he asked for was, could I help raise money for a playground? And that seems like just such a quotidian, banal thing, doesn't it? A playground. You have lots of playgrounds in Hudson. I've seen them. What does that have to do with freedom? In a war with all these grand causes and all this enormous suffering, why is he talking about a playground? And the answer is that that's part of what it means to be free. Just coming out of the basement doesn't mean that they're free. The children have to have some place to go. They have to continue their lives. In American English, when we use the word liberation, we really like to use it for 1945. And I just want to push this point home before I talk about the present. In 1945, when American and British troops arrived in the concentration camps, drove out or arrested the SS, Of course, at the time we called it a liberation, and we can be forgiven for speaking of that as a liberation. But I need you to know that the nurses and the doctors who then arrived in the concentration camps, who were treating the inmates, wrote in their diaries and in correspondence back home that liberation is not the word. Removing the evil is not enough. Freedom isn't just an absence of evil. Freedom has to be a presence of good. So no matter how great the evil is, removing it is not enough. This is our great American mistake. What freedom must be is positive. Freedom has to do with the good things in the world. And the good things in the world are many. Punctuality is good. Spontaneity is also good. Honesty is good. Loyalty is good. Mercy, you would deny that mercy is good, but probably we would also think that consistency is good. There are many, many good things in the world. And a conversation about freedom has to start with the good things. If people are angry when they're talking about freedom, as Americans generally are, that's a sign that something is desperately, desperately wrong with the way we're going about it, right? So, but these good things, and they are good things, there are really good things. The moral good things are just as real as this microphone or this stage. They don't all fit together in some nice, easy way, like pieces in a puzzle. So it's great to be spontaneous, but if you're spontaneous, you're not always going to be punctual. It's great to be loyal and it's great to be honest, but like when I'm signing the books and you say, Professor Snyder, you look great, you may be being honest, or you may be being loyal. I'm not going to know, right? Or take a serious example, mercy and compassion, or mercy, compassion are good, right? Mercy is good. Consistency is good, but you can't be both consistent and merciful because to be merciful means to make an exception. It always means to make an exception. The good things don't fit together, and that's wonderful because it means that the process of being human, for us alone, what living means is making choices among good things and balancing them and combining them in our own particular ways and going through life, accumulating these choices and thereby creating this thing that we call character, right? Over time, free will becomes character. So freedom is positive. Freedom is the best of all things because freedom is the condition in which we can affirm all the other good things in our own way. But if it's positive philosophically, I think it's also positive politically. If you think of those examples from the concentration camps or from deoccupied Ukrainian territory, in order for people to be free, we have to work together to create the conditions for it. So if you're going to make a playground, you have to work together. A kid can't do it on his own. If you're going to create a free public education system, a lot of people have to do it on their own. If you're going to build roads across Ohio, a lot of people have to do it together. There is, in fact, no requirement of freedom which an individual can create. Not a single one. We think of freedom as being this grand individual thing, and of course it is, but for us to become individuals, we have to work together. And in that way, freedom is positive politically as well. So I hope this has been somewhat convincing. If it has, then I want you to consider, and this is the last thought before we begin to talk, just how wrong we are in the way we usually talk about freedom. I've been talking about it as positive. The way that it's spoken about in America almost entirely is negative. That is to say, freedom just means me resisting something. Freedom is me against a barrier, against some kind of restraint. And in practice, in political practice, that means me against the government. And I'll be free when the government is small, which is not true, not true. The human problem with that is that if you think that it's just you against stuff, that means that you never ask who you are, and you never ask what the good things are, which means you have not taken the first step towards being free. The political problem is that if you think freedom is just negative, you against stuff, and it just means making government small, well, power abhors a vacuum. The social media platforms and the oligarchs will fill that vacuum. You're not going to get freedom by making the government small. You're just going to get other forms of power, which you didn't elect. And then finally, and then we can talk about all this, but then finally what happens is if you've trained yourself or been trained to think that freedom is just negative, just you against the world or you against other things, you against the government, it's very easy to make that little step to the side and decide, well, freedom is me against my fellow Americans. They're the barrier. They're the problem. And so you never ask who you are yourself. You never ask what freedom is for. And very quickly you find yourself in the America we're in today, where an awful lot of people think being free just means naming an enemy. So that's wrong. It's gotten us where we are. If we think of freedom as positive, a lot of the American tensions drop away. If we think of it as positive, we realize there is no tension between freedom and government. Valuing freedom means the right kind of government, the kind of government that helps us make free. There's no tension between freedom and security. 99 times out of 100, if I make you more free, I make you more secure, and vice versa. And the future opens up. Because when we think just in terms of negative freedom, me against you, me against the world, me against the enemy, me against whatever, the future never even appears. We're stuck in a repetitive status quo. But if we think of freedom as something positive, about affirming values together and creating the conditions for affirming those values together, then suddenly the future opens up, which is something I think we very much need. Thank you for your patience. Looking forward to talking.
And the sound, if we hold them like this, is the sound in the back, or could you use it a little louder? Maybe more like this. So if we hold them more like this, I think we're a little bit better off. Okay. So welcome to Hudson, and we've got questions coming in. If you have one of those cards, Polly, over here with the gold box, you'll want to get those to her, and then she'll eventually get them to us. So just look for Polly with the gold box. But, oh. We're going to have cards for you, too. We've got it all under control. You're on your Ohio tour, as they mentioned. This is not your first time in Ohio by a long shot. So tell people, if they don't realize, your Ohio connection.
Well, it's funny when you say Ohio tour, because in seventh grade, I had to do an Ohio tour where, with two other kids, we had to design an itinerary which took us to every single Ohio county and then write a mini report on every single Ohio county. And I did this, I hope you guys are out there listening, by the way. I did this with the two bad kids in the class, and because they wanted me to do all the work, which I did. So I wrote all the reports, and they were supposed to design, there was supposed to be a map of Ohio that came into it, and they promised they were going to do the map. And I was like, yeah, you're never going to do it. But they kept their word. On the night before the assignment was due, one of them stole a large plate glass window from a basement, and the other one painted a map of Ohio, and it didn't actually look bad. It actually looked pretty good. So, but it did involve theft. Anyway, I'm not going to mention any names. I grew up in Ohio. My family's from Clinton County, which is rural southwestern Ohio, and I grew up in the Dayton suburbs in Centerville. So it's not, I spent the first 18 years of my life in this state, and I come back at least once every year. Yeah.
And does Hudson at all remind you of where you are now at Yale in Connecticut? The Connecticut Western Reserve?
I feel like that's a loaded question.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is.
It's certainly the case that as you come in, like before you hit the kind of Cleveland, Akron, Canton, there are these pretty little towns, which if you're from New England, you think, oh, well, that's a pretty little town which has a square, and maybe that reminds me of New England. I'm sure it worked the other way too. I'm sure if you were from like Hudson and you were driving into northwestern Connecticut, you'd be like, oh, there's some cute towns here which look just like Hudson, except the roofs are strange. There's no Spanish tile.
See, so you knew, you heard all about that. Well. So I missed the first portion of when you were speaking, so forgive me if this was covered, but through the book, I don't want to give too much of it away, of course. It's fascinating, and I know you just covered a great deal of it. I'm just going to ask about some moments that jumped out at me. One was the difference when it comes to freedom to and freedom from. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that's an important distinction that is often lost on people.
Yeah. So the thing about freedom, That was my phone. It can go into the stage as far as I'm concerned. The thing about no, I was once at an outdoor restaurant and I dropped it between the slats of. The thing about freedom is that you can't just say what it is. You can't be right about it. And so someone who presents a book to you which is about freedom, which is a treatise with like a series of clear statements, like freedom is this, it's that, it's the other thing, and therefore, no taxes on me because I'm a billionaire, which seems to somehow always follow. That can't work, right? One has to talk around freedom in various ways because freedom isn't a proposition, it's a condition. Like freedom is the state of being, the state of affairs in which we are able to choose among the good things, combine them in our own ways, and bring them to life. We have some power to bring them into life. Like that's what freedom is. Freedom is about the person. And the reason why freedom, so there are many ways to distinguish between positive freedom and negative freedom, but talking about the prepositions is one way to do it. So positive freedom means freedom to, or more morally speaking, freedom for. You have some idea of what you want to do, and you're able to go out there and do it, right? That's freedom for. Whereas negative freedom is always freedom from. And freedom from is attractive because it's very elegant and simple. That's why people like it. They say, okay, well, I'm free so long as the government is not doing A, B, and C. That's, and it's good if the government probably doesn't do A, B, and C. The thing is that that's only a part. Freedom to is just the introduction to the beautiful book. Sorry, freedom from is just the introduction to the beautiful book of freedom to. So yes, you shouldn't be in prison, but once you're out of prison, there's this whole world of questions of what kind of person you're going to become, what you're going to stand for, who's going to help you to become that person. Like no part of Ukraine should be occupied, but when it's deoccupied, there's still a whole world of questions about what its future is going to be all about. So we are stuck in freedom from, and that is a big, big, big moral problem. Because if you think freedom is just freedom from, the other guy is always the bad guy, and you are always the good guy. And that is extremely comfortable, but, American newsflash, we're not always the good guys, individually, collectively, any other way, right? You have to make yourself the good guy. The nice thing about negative freedom is that it's always the government that's bad. It's always someone else that's bad. And you never actually have to cultivate in yourself the thing which would make you the good, right? Because the other side is always bad. So in these and many other ways, just thinking about freedom from is a dead end. It's a dead end. And I think in 2024, we are banging up against that dead end, or we're rolling around the bottom of that cul-de-sac, or whatever metaphor you prefer, right? We are stuck, and we're largely stuck because we talk about freedom, but we talk about it the wrong way.
Well, how do you reconcile the view where it's something that comes from us, where in the book you mention one of the amendments you'd like to see is a right to health care, or freedom to access health care, something like that. I mean, I'm not a physician, so how would that freedom work if that was added to the Bill of Rights or something like that?
I think we have to be incredibly creative about how we think about freedom. One of the things that we have this kind of constitutional casuistry in this country where, like, you say you want to have health, and I say you can't because they sucked George Washington's blood and killed him, which they did, by the way. That's how he died. I'm not just making that up. We have this incredible, almost like national masochism, where we say, I want something good, and the response is, you can't have it because in the 18th century they didn't have it, right? And that's not freedom, right? It's looking for reasons not to be free. It's looking for reasons not to be free. So health. Jefferson thought that health was the most important thing for being free, but he didn't have vaccines. There are a lot of things he didn't have, right? Health, the founders were incredibly concerned by isn't necessarily what we learn in elementary school, but plague after plague racked the young republic. Yellow fever, a whole bunch of other things. And the founders were incredibly concerned, and it's like their correspondence is full of it. They couldn't do anything about it. But the fact that they couldn't do anything about it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have wanted to do something about it. It's very clear that they did want to do something about it. Washington actually tried to vaccinate his soldiers. Again, perhaps something which is not written about, I don't know. But the point is that we have to think about freedom generously, right? When Jefferson talks about a right to life, does that mean the shortest possible life with the most possible diseases? Or does a right to life perhaps mean a longer, healthier life, unencumbered and insofar as possible by ailment? I would say it's probably the latter, and I would say you kind of have to be a masochist to think it's the former. So health is essential to freedom, right? So in this book, there's actually a long section, as you know, where I go through like all of the differences that people have about what happiness means, which is reasonable, because what happiness means depends upon different values. Like you're happy not because I give you chocolate cake, although I'm happy to try, but you're happy because you are able to do things according to what you really believe is important, which is why everyone disagrees about what brings about happiness, and why you can and which is why writing the self-help book about how to be happy is always a safe bet, right? There's no end to prescriptions for this because it's going to be different for everybody. But there is one thing which in the 5,000 years of authors that I perused for this, there is total agreement about, and that is health. There is nobody who says, oh yes, it's great to be dying of cancer. That just doesn't come up, right? Like as a positive value. I checked. Nobody says that, right? All the disagreement turns into agreement on that question. So when we are healthy, we are more free. We are more free, we are. And I say that as somebody who's been seriously ill. We are more free when we are healthy. And that is an obvious feature of the kinds of creatures we are. And so the question speaks to how we correctly talk about freedom. Because when we talk about freedom negatively, as us against the world, the us, it's always like a Hollywood hero, right? Fit, ready for action, perhaps wearing some kind of uniform, right? Perhaps with superpowers. When it's negative freedom, we're always ready, right? But that's not what life is like. The way that life begins is that we are born squalling, and from that moment forward, we need a huge amount of assistance and support in order to become that free person who might later do that dramatic deed. And part of that is healthcare. There is no reason why we should have to be thinking about healthcare so much. It makes us more fearful, it makes us die younger, it makes us more anxious. We're losing years of life compared to Canadians. Why? We're losing years of life compared to the Japanese. Why? We're losing years of life compared to every comparably wealthy nation. Why? We're losing years of life compared to Costa Rica. Why is that? And why is it that some Americans think being dead is being free? It's not. You're not free when you're dead. That's just a big misunderstanding. So, no. Yeah, no, you're not. I mean, I checked it out. No, I had a look. It's not how it felt.
It's in the book.
It's not how it felt. So, and let me try to make this practical too. If you are not anxious about healthcare, then you can do things that you wouldn't otherwise do, like leave your job. It's not normal that you can't leave your job because you need healthcare. Nobody else does it that way. That is an American, masochistic, anti-freedom choice that we have made. You're not free if you can't leave your job because you only get healthcare by way of your job. That's a way of making you less free, which we have normalized and internalized. But it makes us less free than the Norwegians and the Danes and the Swedes and all the other people who live in normal democracies where healthcare is just present. But there's a more fundamental answer, which I hope I got across, which is that if we're going to be real about freedom, we have to be real about what kinds of creatures we are. We can't imagine that we're always robust, healthy, ready to fight off that dragon or Godzilla or whatever it is. We have to treat ourselves as people who are born and are going to die and are going to be sick along the way. If you start with the way our bodies actually are, then you have a chance of setting up institutions which will make us more free.
Good way to put it. By the way, is the audio, has it improved at all in the back?
No.
Maybe. I think, I'll be honest, when this building was being built, before it's finished, I used to ride my bike through this part of the building a lot. It was just a shell of a building. So the wiring may not be great because of me 20 years ago. If there's a way, I think if we get right on the mic, maybe like this. Is this better if I'm right on it? Okay, so I think that if we do that, because I know that everyone's excited about this. So you mentioned I won't give anything away, but there is a section of the book where you're talking about your health issue.
You can give stuff away. That's okay. It's a big book, and they're going to forget anyway.
Okay,
So give stuff away by all means.
Sepsis, you're suffering from sepsis and all sorts of things. See, I didn't, everyone now is thrilled about hearing that. But that section of the book, you weave that together. Of course, your visits to Russia, popular music. And there was one thing that stuck out at me, and this seemed strange. You're talking about going to see the group REM several times during your I think, high school, college, graduate year. And I think I have the exact quote here. You said, no one expected much of me in life, I think is what you're getting at. What follow up on that, because I don't think that you say anything more. That one line really jumped out at me, and then you continued on talking about there's a thing with them and Czechoslovakia. But no, this is not in your book. I wish I'd written down the page number, and then we could expound on this. Does this sound at all familiar?
So I want to know, those of you in the back who could hear the question, did you understand it?
I want to know why you felt no one expected much from you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hold back. And by the way, like riding your bicycle like across the wiring is a really good example of how values clash.
See?
Right? Like it's great to be the kind of guy who rides his bike across a construction site.
There you go.
On the other hand, if you ride your bike across the construction site, then like other things might be compromised later, like intelligibility.
Right.
in this case. Okay, I'm gonna try to talk about what's important, which is the music. So there's a lot of music in this book, not just REM, but Frank Zappa, and a lot of music. And the reason why there's music is memory. So freedom, if we have freedom, it only exists over time. It only exists over time. Freedom isn't just that moment when you're driven into a corner and you fight desperately. Freedom, if it exists over a life. Freedom means that you can look into the future and see possibilities, but you can only look into the future and see possibilities if you can remember the past. Every future that's possible and thinkable is somehow connected to a past. And you see this, so I'm saying something which all the tyrants know, because what the tyrants try to do is cut you off from the future. They don't talk about it, they make it seem unthinkable, we forget about it, and they cut you off from the past. They don't teach you history, or if they do teach you history, they teach you this kind of incredibly childish, we were always the good guys type of thing, and call it history. They cut you off from the future, they cut you off from the past, and then they try to get you into a kind of eternal present where it's always us against them, and we're fighting about this, we're fighting about that. What does that have to do with music? Everything. Because music is one of the ways that we remember. Music is one of the ways that we have a human life across time. So when I was dying, for example, I'm trying to make this question hang together. When I was dying, for example, I remembered songs. I listened to music in my mind, like songs that made me feel better, but also songs that were connected to earlier parts of my life. And in general, music is something which allows you to have remembrance of things past. And in an unpredictable way, like you'll hear a song, you may not even remember what the song is, but it will call you back to another decade or to a person you used to know or someone you used to love. And that is really important for freedom. Freedom has to be about remembering. It has to be about having the capacity to remember, because without remembering, we can't think our way into the future either. And so that's like, this is a way that freedom is positive. Like it's about a life. It's about the ability to think about the past and in the future. Nothing much was expected of me. I mean, I was just trying to, like, nothing was expected of me when I was 19 years old and going to REM concerts. Honestly, nothing. I was just some kid from Centerville, Ohio. Nothing was expected from me. But the contrast that I was trying to make, honest, was that when I go to performances now, I really like to be where you are. Because if I'm where you are, that is the only way I can be sure that I'm not going to be asked to perform. Because in any other situation, like, for example, I'm across the street having a salad at the restaurant, in every other situation in my life, I'm now expected to perform, and that's okay. Like I think it's okay to perform. It's good to perform. There are ideas. We have to have the right ideas. We can only have the right ideas if we talk about them. That's good. But the only way for me not to perform is like to be where that gentleman is now, like just be sitting. That's the only way. And so it's a relief for me. That was all that meant.
Okay. See, aren't you glad now I didn't come up and try and talk to you when I saw you from across the street?
Yeah.
I was walking earlier. I said, maybe that's him. Nah, forget it. And then it was you.
There's a dentist in Vienna who looks exactly like me.
Oh, yeah.
And
I know
people
him.
sometimes stop me. Yeah, right? You thought it was that guy. So people sometimes stop me in Vienna because I'm me, and sometimes they stop me because they're like, I'm sorry I missed my appointment last Thursday.
Right. Well, now we are going to, I think we have a big stack of questions here, so I think it would be useful to jump to some of these. Oh, this one has excellent penmanship, so I'll start with this. I am so concerned with misinformation which flows everywhere in the USA. Young people, some are embracing, quote unquote, freedom ideologies, i.e. neo-Nazi groups. They are not aware of European history and what we fought for in World War II. And now that I look at that, I'm not sure if that's a question. You want to go for it?
Yeah,
Okay.
of course. I'm really concerned about misinformation too. Chapter 4 of the book is called Factuality. The way the book works is that the definition of freedom, which I talked to you about for 10 minutes at the beginning, that's the introduction. And then the conclusion is what that means for government. Because my idea is that freedom is what justifies government. It justifies the right kind of government. Like if we want to govern ourselves as free people, we have to design a government which enables the coming generation to be free. Like a land of the free is an intergenerational project, or it doesn't exist at all. But in between the definition and the politics, I have these 5 chapters which are about what I call the forms of freedom, which are sovereignty, unpredictability, mobility, factuality, and solidarity. These are the ways we have to be with one another, the things that are between the ideas and the politics. And I look at the stack of cards with a little bit of fright. And factuality is one of the things one of the forms of freedom, because we need, first of all, to be constructive. If we all have different values, as we should have different values, we have to have facts. We have to have the same facts. Because if we have different values and the same facts, we can get things done. But if we have different values and different facts, we can't get anything done. Or worse, if we have different values and nobody believes there is such a thing as facts, then we'll never get anything done, right? Unless we happen to be oligarchs who own social media platforms, and then the thing we'll get done is destroying the world, which is a thing, I guess. So I'm concerned about misinformation too, and I spent a lot of time in that chapter and also the chapter 2 on unpredictability, which is largely about social media. We're thinking about how we can generate factuality again. Because of course there are always going to be lies and attempts to lie and attempt to fool people. The question, and this is an example like par excellence of how we have to work together. Because the individual who is in mom's basement watching the Nazi propaganda, like maybe you can reach that person as an individual, but the overall problem is that the internet is not regulated the way that it should be, that social media profits are not redistributed towards journalism, that we don't have enough history education in schools, and those are all problems which no individual can solve. Those problems can only be solved collectively, and so it's a beautiful example of how if you actually wanted to have a society of free people, you would have to take the right kind of collective action to fix it. And of course it's true that we don't know the history of the Second World. I mean, it's sad, right? I mean, this is a very sad one, that we're losing, like the 1930s and 1940s were an anti-fascist moment in American history in 2 ways. The first is we fought and won the Second World War, defeating fascists in the only way that fascists can be defeated. And the second is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as president, was able to hold back the native forces of fascism in the United States of America, and he partly did it with an agenda which was unmistakably one of positive freedom, where he talked about freedom as not just being the government not doing things for you, but the government creating conditions in which more of us could be more free.
There you go.
It's nice that FDR still has some backers.
Yes.
Let's make him Secretary of Commerce.
There you go. Here's another question. I imagine a lot of the students that you have at Yale, they're probably voting in their first general election, a good number of them. So this follows on that. Have you noticed a change in students' attitudes about government in the past few years?
Well, it's funny. I mean, it's funny how time goes by so quickly, because if you're teaching, so a student at a university, theoretically at least, is there for 4 years. I mean, as you parents know, it's probably like 5 3/4, but theoretically, it's the same interval in which we have our presidential elections. And so from the point of view of a student, it's their first election, and everything up to that was, so to speak, normal. So I'm going to take a step back and just remember 2016. In 2016, the striking thing was that the students, I mean, they didn't really think that things could change. They imagined that, like, Obama was forever. Like, he'd serve, because think about it, if you're 18 and Obama has served for since you were 10, like, that's your life. That's really all you remember. You don't, and so, like, I remember a friend of mine, a young friend, one of the most intelligent political observers I know now, actually, from whom I learned a lot, including for this book. But back then, he was being honest. He said, like, we didn't think anything was going to go wrong except global warming. Like, we thought that was it. We thought we were down to that. That was where that's where a lot of the kids were in 2016. They didn't think that, like, the political system had opened up such, possibilities. Now, the concern is that government can't do anything anyway, in a bad sense, that, that with Trump or with other people like Trump, the government will just cease to function. And that's a new kind of concern. And that it's not just that we'll botch global warming, like, we'll botch everything because the US isn't going to be functional. So that's a short answer to what students are thinking.
Okay, interesting. Someone asked, this is just part of a question that came in about social media, which you kind of answered already, but do you feel the creeping in of social media has been more damaging than poor civics education? Do you think either of those is more prevalent, more to blame for where we are now?
I mean, the way I like to think about these problems is that you solve them together. So people make enormous profits from social media, which is basically incredibly low technology run at incredibly high speed, set to manipulate the very lowest parts of our psychology on the basis of experiments that were run in the 1950s. Like, there's nothing impressive about social media except that it's destroying the world. Aside from that, that's the thing. Like, it's not high tech. Like, that's its propaganda. It's not high tech. We've been trained to associate social media with technology. It's barely technology. Like, it basically amounts to being able to bang two pans together, but at incredibly high speed. That's it. It's only the speed which makes it so powerful. So, like, you're frightened by a certain, vibration of pans, and you're frightened by a different one, and the algorithms figure that out and feed it to you. That's pretty much it. I mean, okay, I realize there's some creative TikTokers out there in the younger generation who are still awake, and, like, there's slight resistance there. But in general, that's basically it. But so you solve this kind of thing by, you say, okay, I'm going to tax Facebook a tiny amount, and with that tiny amount I tax Facebook, I can revive all the local newspapers in the United States. With a tiny bit more tax, I could train 10,000 teachers to teach civics. It's not that hard to address one problem by also addressing the other problem. If I had to, that's what I think freedom, by the way, is kind of about. Like, the way we get stopped as Americans is we end up, like, there are problems, and we end up thinking, well, we can't solve them, because freedom. Like, that's the American way. We can't solve problems because freedom. Whereas it's the other way around. Like, freedom means that you juggle things, you improvise, you figure out ways to solve more problems than one at the same time. But if I had to choose, which I don't, but if I had to choose, I'd choose social media, because social media has done the following things to us. It has shrunk our concentration spans enormously. And I don't just mean the youngins. I mean everybody. Like, the whole idea that social media it's damaged the young. I see it. But it's also damaged the old. Like, it's damaged the old to the point that they only think it's damaged the young. Thank
Well,
you.
yeah.
I appreciate that. Moments of self-recognition are healthy. So it's made us less aware of our own culture. It's made us less aware of all the cool things other Americans are doing in music or in art, because we're all focused on fleeting generic things. And it has made us, I'm sorry to say, but it's just made us dumb. It's made us dumb. And we're getting to the point, which is something that like, you're not supposed to say, right? Because you might get offended, but it's made us dumb. And being offended when someone says you might be dumb is a sign that you're dumb. Right? Consider the possibility that social media has made you dumber, because it's made us all dumber. Like even the pro-social media libertarian guys, and they are all guys, they love IQ, right? They think IQ is the greatest thing in the world, and what they won't tell you is that social media has made IQ crash. IQ has been crashing for 10 years in the developed world for one reason and one reason alone. So if I had to pick one, I would pick like seriously revising social media, how we use it, but more importantly, how we regulate it. And it can be done, right? When the printing press was invented or when radio was invented, they were unregulated and they caused huge confusion and even lots of death. The religious wars of Europe were largely a result of the printing press and things we would now call plagiarism and slander. When you get those things under control, then you end up with a book, right? And we're all here in a library, so we're all going to agree that books are nice. Books are great, right? Books are civilizing, but you don't get to books without some design. And the same is going to be true with social media. Either we're going to design it better, or it's going to bring us down.
I think this is going to be the last question, I think, based on the timing. Maybe one more. But On Tyranny, your previous book, you said that Russians going to the polls in 1999 did not know they were voting in the last free election. Do you see a parallel between that election and the current U.S. election? Maybe I should
Of course. Of course. And that is the thing. That is the thing about elections. You take them for granted, and then, until you don't have them anymore. And of course I do. And democracy is hard, and democracy is rare, and democracy usually slips away. And the only way it doesn't slip away is if people get a grip and do the little things that they can do and realize that history is not on your side, the Constitution's not on your side, the economy is not on your side. There is no thing which is on your side. Nothing is on your side, and there never was. Nothing was ever on your side. Capitalism was never on your side. The Founding Fathers were never on your side. The only thing which is on the side of democracy is the people. That and that alone. That is the only thing. Wealth is not on the side of democracy. Power is not on the side of democracy. Our foreign enemies are not on the side of our democracy. There is nothing in the galaxy that is for democracy except the people. That is it. That is the one, and that's the bad news, and that's the good news. So of course I see that parallel. And when if and when, God forbid, we lose democracy in the United States, we will look back just like everyone else and we'll say, oh, well, guess it had to happen that way. Or I guess this really is democracy, is a thing we have now where like 3 generations of people with the same name rule over us. And there's only one social media account, and we're all on it. We'll adjust to that just like everybody else will. That is, the people who don't take democracy seriously today will adjust to its absence tomorrow, and very quickly. We're not better than anybody else unless we show that we're better. I'm willing to be convinced that we're better, but I don't see it. I don't see it. Maybe I'll see it in 2 weeks, right?
I can't really follow that with another question, I don't think. Did you have any concluding remarks you wanted to make?
I think you should ask me another question because
Okay.
because I really think we need to. That was like the ending with a challenge is good, but maybe we could go for high note.
You'll love this then. What do you think? Well, if you want high note, maybe I don't want to ask that. Let's see here.
You can ask a couple
You sure?
more as far as I'm
Okay.
concerned.
Well, what do you think about Thomas Jefferson's thought that it's necessary to have a revolution every 30 years or so? We're 30 years out from what was the contract with America, for example.
So it really depends on what you mean by revolution. The thing which happened in 1776 was a bit of a one-off. And it's not really a pattern for future American politics. When you're the most powerful country in the world, you can't really say, I'm going to rebel against, some other power, right? Which is why Hollywood always has to lean into aliens, because that's the only... No, it is. I mean, that's the only plausible negative freedom way to look. Okay, we're liberating ourselves from the alien empire. Oh, great. Where's Will Smith? Thank you for that 20th century reference recognition. Like a lot of things with the 18th century, it doesn't make sense to go back and say we could have a revolution like that every 30 years, because there isn't the equivalent of a British Empire oppressing us every 30 years. That was a one-off, and after we won, not that so much that war, but the 1812 one, we then became, right? We became the great power. We swept across this continent. We made the rules. We oppressed others. We created our own system, right? We are that thing. We are the thing that's in the center of the world. So we can't have a revolution against someone else, because we are the someone else. We're the biggest someone else on the block. So the way I prefer to understand the 18th century is the way that Frederick Douglass suggested in his famous speech about the 4th of July, where I think he praised the founders in exactly the right way. He said, these men were rebels in their own time, and so therefore the way to honor them is to be rebels in your own time. So not so much to take Jefferson literally, because Jefferson frankly said a lot of stuff, but rather to say these people rebelled in a way which was appropriate to their time, with failings and limitations associated with their time. To be faithful to them means to be rebellious in your own time, which means identifying correctly the enemies of freedom, which is not, by the way, it's not the British Empire. We got to update. Correctly identifying the enemies of freedom, correctly identifying what freedom means, which they worked really hard at, and they failed in some ways and succeeded in others. But that's kind of the spirit of my book is you have to work really hard to try to get it right, and then your rebellion might make some kind of sense. So I would say no to like an automated every 30-year revolution, but I would say yes to figuring out what it means to be a rebel in your own time.
Good way to put it. Well, thank you for coming to Hudson, Timothy Snyder. He's going to be out there in the rotunda in a moment. You'll see him there.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to those of you in the back who couldn't hear. I just want you to know that everything that Adib said was very wise and funny.